Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Right, is every time we interact with a buyer, are we being deliberate in saying the outcome of this interaction with the buyer is that they are some degree closer to making a decision than they were before? And if we can answer that question affirmatively, then we say, yeah, we delivered something of value during this interaction that helped the buyer move closer to making a decision.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show, where we help you not just hit your sales target, but really thrive in sales. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe, and let's meet today's guest.
Hi, I'm Andy Paul. I'm the founder of The Sales House. And Sales House is a personal development and learning platform for B2B sellers to help them master their craft. You can find The Sales House at thesaleshouse.com.
On this episode of the show, Andy, we're diving into how you can speed up your sales cycle, how you can speed up your sales process, how the buying process fits into all of this, why we need to take control and we need to own ourselves, our own actions, a whole lot more. And with that, let's jump right in. Is speeding up the sales process, is this a selfish thing that salespeople do because we want to close more deals, we want to get more in our pipeline, we want to just accelerate? Or is there a positive spin on this for the buyer of speeding up the sales process from their perspective?
Well, really look at it from the buyer's perspective. No one sets out to say, look, I want to spend 6 months to make this decision to buy this product or the service if I could make that decision in 30 days, right? I mean, people don't set out to spend longer making a decision than they need to. And if you look at from the perspective of the buyer, again, depending on what they're purchasing, they're buying it for a reason, right? They want to achieve a certain outcome with that. That outcome, it could be increased market share, better top line growth, better profitability. Why do they want to delay implementing that change? So it's really from the buyer's advantage to be able to make decisions more quickly if they have the information they need in order to make that decision.
So that makes total sense. I'm glad you went down that route, because as I said, it would have been a very short podcast otherwise, Andy. But with that said,
yes,
seemingly it makes sense for everyone if we'll assume here that the qualification process has been successful, that there's a match here between the value that we can offer and the value that's needed on the other side of the table. We don't need to talk about budgets or anything yet, because it's just going to be an incredible deal. It's going to be an incredible experience for everyone involved. Why does it seemingly take longer than it needs to with almost every single deal that I've done personally to get the deal done? Is this down to the fact that sellers struggle to push maybe even the wrong word there, but to engage people through the selling process? Or is this down to an issue on the buyer's side and perhaps they just don't know how to buy whatsoever?
Well, there's certainly more research that's come out from Gartner recently saying that, yeah, I mean, it sort of substantiates what I've always known throughout my career, which is that buyers really don't know how to buy. And when you're talking about something that's not a transactional product, hey, we're not buying staplers or paper, but if we're buying anything with any sort of complexity, this may be something they do every 3 years, every 5 years. Well, have they documented a process or something they do so infrequently? What the research is showing is no, they haven't. In fact, they really don't look at it as a process. If you look at what Gartner's done, they look at it as a series of jobs they need to get accomplished that have multiple stakeholders involved in that. And I share in my emails and other things with people this chart that Gartner showed at their most recent conference about their diagram of the buying process, and it's like an intricate circuit diagram, right? There's no linear stage-based progression that they go through. It's really sort of helter-skelter. It's a chaotic, ambiguous environment, and when you have that, things are going to happen that you don't anticipate. Gartner refers to this process they call looping, where maybe one of the jobs to get done is you have to specify what your requirements are. Well, if suddenly 2 more stakeholders decide to get involved, you may have thought that was settled, and suddenly it's not settled at all. So as a seller, you really have to relinquish this idea that you have any control over that whatsoever, because you don't. I mean, it is, I hate to use this cliche, people talk about herding cats. There's a little of that in this whole thing. But by the same token, you also have to have some awareness of where you are, right? And what's been accomplished. It doesn't necessarily align, let's say, with this linear stage-based process, but are you helping the buyer continue to make progress in aggregate toward making a decision? And that's something you can know.
So if we're not in total control of what's going on within an account? I'm going through this at the moment.
You're not in control in any degree.
Okay, so if we're not in
Anyway, yes.
control, so if we're not in control, and I use your words, in any degree, what are we in control of our side? Because if we're not in control of anything our side, our hands are up in the air, and perhaps we just need 15 times more pipeline and just let things fizzle out by itself, right? Which clearly is probably not a good strategy.
It's not a good strategy. Unfortunately, it's the one that many industry segments are using these days. What we're control is ourselves, right? Is every time we interact with a buyer, are we being deliberate in saying the outcome of this interaction with the buyer is that they are some degree closer to making a decision than they were before? And if we can answer that question affirmatively, then we said, yeah, we delivered something of value during this interaction that helped the buyer move closer to making a decision. That's what you're trying to achieve. And that requires, as I said, it's a level of being deliberate and intentional about every action you take, which really escapes too many sellers. They sort of think, okay, well, I haven't heard from the buyer in 2 weeks. I just need to reach out. Yeah, but why are you reaching out? What are you hoping to accomplish? What's in it for them at that point? So if you're not thinking this very clearly, saying, look, every time they give me time, I need to give them something of value. You're wasting their time and you're not making progress toward a decision. And there's really a better way for people to really think about it. There's really two decisions that take place. The first decision is the buyers are going to make this binary decision. Are we going to make this change or not? Right? Do we have a business case in place? Are we going to make this investment or not? And then having made that decision, they say, okay, who are we going to make this change with? So clearly, you want to be the solution upon which they're basing their decision whether or not to make the change or not. So there is somebody always in a favored position at that point, and you'll make sure that's you. I call that winning the sale before you win the order. You want to win the sale. And once you're in that pole position, and you really are in the pole position, if once they make that decision, it's really based, that business decision, the go, no go, and it's based on your solution, even though you haven't given the proposal. If you got to that point, let me step back. This part drives me nuts. I'm on my soapbox here. Is that people think that they can qualify prospects without talking about price. And it's just absolutely impossible. And so your customer, your prospect, can't make that go, no-go decision unless they've done an internal business case on the offerings that are out there. So they have to know the pricing, at least at a budgetary level, before they can do that. And they have to be able to correlate that price, that investment they're going to make, with a quantifiable sum, if you will, of what the outcome is. The value they're going to receive from the outcome they're going to achieve, right? If that's top line growth, if that's profitability growth, whatever that is, that all has to take place before they can make that go, no-go decision.
So I was going to ask you a question here, Andy, and I think you've already answered it, but I don't want to gloss over it because you might just have killed I'm just checking in email for forever and for good here. I was going to ask you if our goal is to move them closer to the prospect, closer to the sale, hopefully, or a no, and we can move on to someone else, perhaps, if that's we put that option in if we're being realistic. But the buying process is this helter-skelter, just a mess, and I'm imagining it as you're describing it, just a spider's web on a page of all kinds of things that could possibly go on, and clearly as we get to an even bigger account, someone could step in, people are moving jobs and all kinds of things going on, especially over longer deal sizes. So how do we step by step move someone towards a end point if we don't know where we are, or if there's snakes and ladders, the board game-esque kind of ups and downs of all this? Is it as simple as you outlined then, we need to ask ourselves, have we helped them make a decision to purchase, and are they going to make a purchase of us? Should that be essentially the basis of every communication that we have with them? Because that makes it incredibly simple on the surface, I guess.
Well, that is a little simplistic, especially in more complex deals. But what Gartner does is they outline there's 4 core jobs that the buyers need to achieve, and I forget them all at the top of my head today. But you can sort of say, okay, have we accomplished these jobs, right? Have we accomplished specification? Have we accomplished awareness of solutions? Have we accomplished whatever? And you can measure progress based on that. There are unknowns. I said more stakeholders could become involved. They may have to go through the process again. Something may have changed internally. There's only so many variables that you can control, mostly just yourself, right? Internally, you don't have a lot of that. But for me, in my experience, working with really large accounts over the years, is you have to have sort of a grasp mentally of everything, all the pieces. And the thing that's hard for a lot of sellers these days, I think, is that everybody wants to write everything down and just sort of put it away, right? I talked to this person, I put it in the CRM system, I don't have to think about it anymore, as opposed to, you're working something really important. And I wrote about this morning in the email sent to our list is you got to be constantly thinking about these things, right? It's a tough intellectual job. It's not a process-driven job. It's really an intellectual, creative job to sell large, complex accounts because there's so many factors, so many variables at play. And you have to constantly be thinking about it because you need to say, okay, well, maybe there's a different perspective I should be looking at in terms of how we solve the customer's problem, how we explain to the customer the value they can receive from our solution, any number of things. And it's this approach that we see sort of accentuated by the increasing use of sort of tools and technology to try to make things very cut and dried when the last thing they are is cut and dried. This is still a personal business, a human to human business. There's emotions involved, there's risk involved, people's, sense of their jobs at risk type thing. You deal with that on a human level, and it's really hard to sort of put that all out. Like I said, here's 5 steps. We're going to follow those 5 steps and be done. It just takes a tolerance of ambiguity that is really essential, I think, to succeed in any sort of sale with any sort of complexity.
There's some quote along, and I'm totally going to butcher it because I can't remember who said it, but essentially, the more uncertainty that you can handle, the more success you're going to have in kind of business and life. It makes things easier when you're able to let go of things on that front. But and I want to take a side detour here for a second, and we'll come back onto the speeding up the sales process in a second. I don't know if you know him. I can make an introduction if you like, but I had Kevin from BoxStep on not too long ago. He's from the UK. It's a application that's a web app that essentially allows you to map out accounts by individuals, relationships, and all these weird crisscrosses. And this dude hates me in this account, but is the person who sits next to him absolutely loves me, and you can map all this stuff out. Now, I find it's really useful when I'm doing working with the larger companies within the sponsorships and the things that we do on the podcast. I visually really like to see it on a page, and it helps just refresh my memory when I make a call, not to mention Jane, because she really hates Barry, and Barry doesn't like, and it kind of goes down that kind of pathway on these big accounts. Other than kind of BoxStep, and I'll link that in the show notes for anyone who's interested, how do we document some of this? Because it's one thing to say, we need to go with it, we need to go with the flow, we need to understand the relationships, we need to have the relationships perhaps to be able to ask these more interesting questions of, who's going to veto this, who's likely to jump in at the last minute and have a conversation and want to be kind of involved in this perhaps further down the line. But how do we map all that out? Or is it just a lost cause and perhaps a waste of energy to do so?
No, I think it's a good idea to use an application like BoxStep or document it as a note within Salesforce so others can reference it and so on. I mean, I always wanted to write it down. I always wondered why I did it. I'd draw it out, right? Similar to a flow chart, just to see map out an account. And I don't see it done quite as often, but before you make little account tree drawings and try to understand the relationship between individuals. I think it's really good to see it visually like that. Because again, that's one of those things is if you're going to keep ruminating about it, what's the context that you're ruminating about in, right? I sort of understand these vague relationships between people and I've mapped them as best I could. Have I missed something, right? Is there somebody that has an influence here that I didn't know they had an influence? Because I think if you think back to research that Discover Or did last year before with Steve Martin, talking about consensus decision making. We see that more and more stakeholders, everybody's sort of acknowledged that's the case, but human dynamics still work within those environments, and there's still somebody who's more preeminent than others, perhaps within those group settings. You need to know who those people are. So I think, using an app like BoxStep where we can visually see this, I think that's very important.
Perfect. Okay, so back on track then, Andy. Speeding up the sales process, what leverage points do we have to speed it up? If we're accepting of the situation we find ourselves in, we're giving up control here, we're kind of doing some kind of Buddhist meditation on the account and allowing it to kind of form itself, and we're just doing our binary steps forward when we possibly can. What leverage points do we have to physically speed it up if we know that we're slow with these accounts at the moment?
Well, I mean, it really requires identifying what information they still need in order to make a decision. And they may or may not be aware of that. And part of your job is to help them understand, talking to the people who are involved in the decision, what the stakeholder, not all stakeholders are equal, right? This is, I think, well, a lot of people sort of mistake when they think about this whole idea of there's multiple stakeholders. Referring to what I was talking about with Discover before, there's some that are more equal than others. You need to have the conversations with them to say, okay, what's still missing for you, right? What's preventing you from making this go, no-go decision to say, yeah, this is something we want to do. Now let's choose the vendor we want to do it with. And a seller should really be thinking about this in this way. This two-step construction is, are they in a position where they can make the go, no-go decision? Have they assessed the risk? Have they decided to risk to them individually as the stakeholders, a risk to the organization from an implementation standpoint, or the risk we present as a seller, right? Is that the area of risk that they're uncomfortable about? How do we deal with that? And identify these areas that are outstanding. And it just requires you keep asking the question. People think it's really a form of qualification, right? You're continually qualifying a prospect up to the point they make a decision. And the way you're doing that is you continue to qualify them based on these questions you're asked is, do they have the information they need to make them feel comfortable about making this binary decision? And then subsequent, the decision to buy from us.
Is this something that we can set up perhaps before we even do the qualification with our initial outreach somehow? I love the term go, no go. Given an example, I get a ton of emails from people who I've got no money or budget to buy anything. So I don't know why people email me trying to kind of sell me stuff, especially like SaaS software
club, right?
and other things. But yeah, so I don't know why people, I'm clearly not qualified in the first place. But people email me saying, hey, I would love to work with you on this. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. Is there a way to get rid of, clearly that's not very useful, get rid of that and set things up from the very beginning that, I'm a consultant, I can potentially help you with this and this. It's a binary yes, no decision. How do we frame that up in the minds of our prospects rather than, I guess, trying to sneak it in after the fact?
Well, I think that's a separate decision, though. I talk about the go, no-go decision, which is people have said, yeah, we're committed to make this change, or let's say we're committed to investigate making the change, right? Whereas you're talking about even a more preliminary decision, which is, yeah, we're just not ready right now. And the way you get to that is just be more direct, right? Is when you're a seller, you have to think about the fact that you're basically making an argument or you're advocating for a point of view with the prospect. And so instead of beating around the bush is make your case. And
and why don't people do that, Andy? Because I enjoy arguing and debating, and maybe assertive is perhaps the best way to describe how I would say. If I know I can really help an organization, we've got Salesforce mug on the table here. We've done a ton of work with them. I know I can help them on the content creation side of things. Everything that we do on their side, I can be and I know them over there. I've been over to San Francisco. I've met them all. I can be relatively assertive of, right, this quarter, we can do this and this for you. Let's get it done. Like, yes, no, don't waste my time because I can go to someone else with the same project and I can do that. But for me, 5 years ago in medical device sales, when you're stood in front of a scary surgeon you're not sure if he's going to scream at you and kick you out the theater if you say the wrong thing, and you've got your mortgage on the line and all these other things going on. Is this a mindset thing that we need to get in our head, that we should be perhaps more assertive and have an argument, or have one side of an argument that we're putting across? Or is this, do we need to learn the skills of assertiveness, the skills of kind of arguing and not necessarily arguing, but debating, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's people's, I think, sometimes confused when you're talking about you're making an argument. Well, you're advocating a point of view, right? And well, I think in your case, if you just look at your journey, what you've done over the past 4 years, that's what you're saying is, I wasn't as confident in my knowledge and my understanding of the medical devices and the benefit and the value they had as you are about your own product that you're selling and servicing now. So it's that one is, it's sort of a mindset around confidence, right? Are you confident that the solution is something you can really advocate forcefully for? And if you don't have that, then okay, do we need to train you more about what the value is? Is it unclear to you what the value is that we're offering and what this really has and holds for our prospects? If that's the case, like I said, that's sort of an internal training onboarding type thing. It could just be a product you're not comfortable with compared to, as in your case, you've evolved to something that's you. Well, hey, you are the easiest thing in the world to sell, right? We all know that people work for ourselves. It should be the easiest thing to sell. So, yeah, it's confidence, and people don't hear no, right? We got all the prototypical sales things, right? The salesperson doesn't want to hear a no. Yeah, it takes a little training, right? Or experience, actually, not training. Like, it takes experience to want to get that no, because you don't want to waste time, right? I don't want to spend time selling to someone who's not going to buy. So I've spent a good chunk of my career, but also in the time that I've been writing and talking and speaking publicly, talking about this idea of you want to get to know quickly. You want to ruthlessly qualify prospects and stop kidding yourselves about whether someone is or is not a company that's going to buy from you. And unfortunately, we've got whole segments of sort of the sales business these days where managers are fixated by this idea of multiples of pipeline coverage, and that just encourages bad behavior, because what it says is if I need 5x pipeline coverage, I'm sort of dooming myself to low close rates and dooming myself to spending a good portion of my time dealing with prospects who are just not qualified to buy from us.
I'm sure it's a podcast on its own, a workshop, 15 keynotes. But what does it mean, or what does it look like to, in your words, ruthlessly qualify someone?
So I alluded to it earlier, is you can't say you have a qualified prospect until they can quantify the value they're going to receive from the solution you're selling to them. If that's increased market share, if that's, like I said, increased profitability, decreased costs, whatever that dimension is, if they haven't quantified the value of what that is, right, in dollars or euros, whatever, right? They
Pounds, euros,
pounds. That's right. I forgot.
We're not there yet, Andy.
It's the new UK. It's the new UK. Pounds. We're back to pounds again. Back to the future. Is if they haven't quantified that, then they haven't made the internal business case to make the go no go decision. They don't have the information. So for me, you never have a qualified prospect until they've made that binary decision. They can't make that decision until they can quantify what they're going to receive from the outcomes they're going to receive from your value that you're providing. When does that happen? Well, I mean, that's not like you see a lot of companies these days. We're going for SDRs, qualify the prospect. Well, no. You may qualify them whether they're qualified to have the next conversation, but they're not qualified as a prospect till you get to this level of depth. And if you're an account manager working too many accounts, you can't possibly spend the time that's required to come to this level of qualification. So by necessity, you're going to sort of do it very superficially, and you're going to suffer a low close rate. And I challenge sales leaders to say, look, you have a choice. I mean, you could close 1 out of every 5 deals, or you could do a much better job of qualification and close 3 out of every 5 deals. Which one do you want? Or maybe instead of 5 times pipeline coverage, you just do 2 times pipeline coverage. Yeah, you little risk perhaps that you're running a little thin on your coverage, but if you can consistently close 1 out of every 2 deals, you'd much rather do that. You're going to have a much more solid customer relationship than you would have otherwise.
So I think you subtly said something here, but I just want to go over it again, because this is potentially important. This probably drives home this point. But you said that the customer needs to quantify your offering. So are we giving them the data and saying, right, you guys need to do a bit of work on your side here? Or are we putting together a crazy slide deck with help from marketing and our own finance team that says, you should buy because you're going to get X ROI? Now, give us your cash. Is it getting them to do a bit of work and kind of leveraging them to prove it to themselves? Or is this something that we can just tell them?
You have to work with them. They have to go through a process. They have to see it. And so some people, they're coming with ROI calculators, but those have to be real numbers, right? People just are putting in fake numbers. Then they're still not going to be comfortable they're making the right choice, right? Or even to proceed. And this is really a critical point that, again, we'll keep hammering here is that everybody makes this go, no-go decision first. And that requires that they have a really good sense, not a final sense, but a really good sense that, if that they can, let's say if their goal is to increase market share 5%, and that's worth $100,000 a month to them, they need to have that number. Because if their hurdle is, look, in order to invest that money, at a minimum, we have to be able to increase, our market share by $80,000 a month. They have to quantify it, right? They have to be able to justify that, they're exceeding what their internal financial goals are in order to make that investment, in order to spend this time and money on this product solution, even to spend the time and money to investigate the solution.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Andy, and you might take off your headphones, throw them across the room and walk off this conversation here, but there's going to be at least 400 people listening to this show right now, whether they're new to sales or the new product or whatever they're doing. And they're going to go, Andy, Will, I don't know how to quantify the numbers of what I'm doing. It just seems like a good thing to do, and that's how I've been selling it. Is it possible to quantify everything in the marketplace, B2B specifically?
Yeah. otherwise, why somebody can make the decision to buy it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some people will make decisions on their gut feel. I mean, it, like everything. Is everything 100%? No. But if you're a business owner, I mean, take yourself an example. You're a business owner. You're looking to make a purchase of some sort. Are you just going to say, oh, yeah, that sounds good? No, right? You're going to see the facts. So the salesman says, oh, take my word for it. It's going to be great. No, you're not going to take their word for it. You want to see the details. You want to see and then you're going to run your own projections, right? What does this mean for my business? What am I going to achieve as a result of making this investment? And, is that going to drive new revenue for me or whatever, dimension is you're looking at? It's natural. People want to go to that level of detail. So again, there are exceptions, a few people that won't. Now, there are situations where I thought you were going with this, and I've worked in those situations with, let's say, new companies, new products that haven't been out there where there isn't a demonstrable track record necessarily. Yeah, then you start getting a little trickier issue, and this becomes a much more difficult sale. It's not that you can't get it, that it starts becoming more about the personal relationships, the credibility, the trust that you develop. And I've had those. I've sold deals worth millions that were basically brochureware, based on a promise. We executed, we delivered, but they had to assess that the risk based on the level of trust and credibility they had with me, or I had with them, excuse me, the risk was measurable, right? And was justifiable for them. And
so would the quantifying in that scenario, they'd be quantifying the up and the downside, right? That would be your discussion points, as opposed to we are almost guaranteed to do X, Y, Z for you.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, they had a price. They could do the same calculation, but then they had to factor it by the risk, right? So what's the risk that the company I work for couldn't perform? Or what's the risk on their side that they couldn't perform and implement in order to achieve the outcome they wanted to achieve? I mean, companies always have to look at it in both scenarios. And I've seen it in both ways as a seller. I've gone into places where I'm new company, relatively new product, and they're definitely calculating, okay, what's the risk quotient here dealing with these guys? But I've been in other scenarios where selling, something maybe worth $50 million, and the company themselves, the buyer, is saying, yeah, what's our risk in terms of being able to actually implement this in a way that we achieve the outcome that we said we could?
So I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like, I know I'm analytically minded. I feel like you are the same. Would that be fair to say, Andy?
Yes.
So we've talked a lot so far on the numbers, the analytics, the upside, the downside, calculating risk, all this kind of stuff. Is there a way to leverage, not leverage, I'm struggling to put this into context, and you'll get what I'm going at here, but there's trust, there's relationships. We can perhaps tug all this into a bracket of the emotion. If there's an analytical way of selling, there's an emotional element of selling as well that we need to get people on board. How does the emotional elements of all this fit in? Because we've seemingly somewhat ignored that so far. Are there any leverage points on the emotional side of things to speed up the sales process?
It's trust and credibility. And so you have to think about those contexts. Trust is, let's take trust as sort of the interpersonal level of trust first, is it gets overlooked, and people sort of assume that it's happening because, let's say you get a seller, they get into a deal, and the buyer hasn't told them to go away yet. And they get further and further into the sales process, and like, oh, well, they must be trusting us because, no, you can't make that correlation, right? I mean, there's lots of reasons why people continue to talk to you. They may have an imperative to talk to 3 vendors before they make a decision. You don't understand that, you're in third place and you have no choice, no hope of winning. I mean, that happens more times than not, I think, for sellers. So establishing that personal level of trust, I have a little acronym I use for trust. I call the 4 cornerstones of trust: is motives, integrity, competence, execution. So you're in order to build trust is your motivations have to be transparent to the buyer. They have to think that you're there to help them, and they can see right through it if you're not sincere about that. And one way that sales companies do this all the time is, yeah, we're here to help you. We're here to help you. We're here to help you. Oh, it's the end of the month. We'll give you a 20% discount if you buy it today. Well, suddenly, yeah, I'm not really here to help you. I just want to get your business, right? So companies submarine themselves all the time with this idea of trust. Integrity is not about honesty and ethics. It's about, do your words align with your actions, right? Are you consistent? Are you do you have integrity between those two? Very important. Again, we always repeat the first example we gave, but do you have the competence to deliver, and do you have the ability to execute on commitments you make? And you can be in a position, you can prove those things. I mean, again, there's always an element of risk that companies are making, but that's what trust is about, right? Trust is an article of faith, actually, in people. So can't always be proven out. So, but if you can sort of work on those 4 cornerstones, then you can build trust. Now, where we're heading with this,
just what we can.
I got so wrapped up in that.
I love it. I'll put all those kind of notes in the show notes to this episode as well over at salesman.org. For everyone who's trying to kind of scribble this down as on the treadmill or doing whatever they're doing as they listen to podcasts.
Yeah, don't try to scribble this down on the treadmill, please.
I've had people. I'll tell you off air for that story of someone on a treadmill, and the audience can imagine what's going on there. So, what I was asking Andy is, that seems like a process with reasonable steps of, again, binary. You can ask someone what they feel about the brand that you work for, and perhaps if you've got a personal relationship. These are things that you can tick off. Maybe it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and we know that we're on 5 or 6, and so we can tick that off. What I was asking was, is there any way to accelerate that process of building the trust? Is there anything we can do to build trust before we, and clearly they are, but I'm kind of baiting you into perhaps giving us your opinion on the idea of social selling and stuff like that here. But should we be
just say that? But
should we be focusing on building trust before we pick up the phone, and building relationships before we're ready to sell to people? And we touched on this in the episode that we recorded previously. Is that a waste of time? Does that happen throughout the sales process, or is that perhaps a good use of our time to be going out for drinks or trying to build relationships before we start actually selling to someone?
Yeah, I don't think it's a pre-requirement at all. Some people use it successfully to get sort of that, to open the door, build enough trust to open the door, so someone will invest a little bit of time in talking with them. But again, there's also companies who are being equally successful just making cold calls without that. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think it's what works for you as an individual, right? What are you most comfortable with doing? I know that some people really like the idea of using social selling as a way to sort of warm up a connection in advance of making a call. Nothing wrong with that at all. I think that's fine. Do what works for you. I know other people are just perfectly happy picking up the phone, making a call out of the blue. I certainly have done my share of that over the years. I said personally, I prefer to warm people up a little bit, whether it's, what I'm doing now. Obviously I've got, huge following on social media and so on is, that sort of does that. But if it's somebody that's, purposely reaching out to connect for a business purpose, I like to send an email first. That's just me, right? And then I'll pick the phone and call them. Find what works for you, because that will help you get in the mode where you can help the customer more quickly. I have to admit, we're talking about accelerating the sale, but I think that, really the key to it is just controlling what you do. That's all you have control over. If you can help the customer gather the information they need more quickly to make a good decision with the least investment of their time and money, then they want that too. So think about what you're doing and the steps that you take in that light, right? And because I think that's what a buyer, if you want to summarize what a buyer is trying to achieve, is they're trying to quickly gather information to make a good decision with the least investment of time and effort possible. And they're not trying to most companies aren't trying to make the best decision. They're trying to make a good enough decision. And there's been a tremendous amount of research done on this. People won Nobel Prizes based on this. They're trying to make a good enough decision. Well, help them make that good enough decision. What do you need to do to help them make that? And you can always just continually be asking and qualifying to that question. And I sometimes make the reference to David Allen, his great book, Getting Things Done. He's a personal productivity maven, one of the greats in the field. And he always talks about this context when you're trying to get things done is, what's the very next physical action? Well, you always want to know that in sales. What's the very next physical action that needs to be taken to help the customer move closer to making a decision? And what can you do to make that happen?
Is that something that we should be drilling into our heads? And I feel like it is. And I don't want to gloss over it there, Andy. And we'll wrap up with this: that we need to make the customers make a good decision. Because I feel like we put a lot of pressure, or potentially I know I do. I put a lot of pressure on myself to make sure that it's the most incredible thing that anyone else has done. Possibly, whenever I deal with anyone, I want them to proactively be giving me a testimonial, which I'm kind of building on my side. I want them to a video testimonial. I want to be able to interview them, or perhaps if on the show or whatever it is. Do we put, as sellers, on a kind of grand scale, are we putting too much pressure on ourselves here? And could we get the same results with that a little bit less stress and pressure if we put the hat on that we just need to do good enough to win the business, make sure everyone's happy, as opposed to blowing people away? And that seems counterintuitive.
Well, I think that
it might be technically correct, but maybe this is different from a business owner as opposed to working from someone who selling for an organization as well, perhaps.
Right. So look at it from this context is, there's research out there that says that anywhere from 50 to 80% of opportunities in a pipeline end up in no decision, right? To me, worst of all possible outcomes, because you didn't qualify the prospect because they didn't make that go, no-go decision. They decide not to do anything. That's the problem. You haven't done a good enough job then, right? You may think you did a good enough, but you didn't do good enough. And so I don't think you can say, as a seller, I'm only going to do what's just enough in order to get the decision. I think you have to approach it. You're always bringing your A game every single interaction. That's really from the buyer's perspective, right? They're saying, look, we have certain outcomes we want to achieve. And when I finally talk to someone who says, yeah, we can do that, and we feel comfortable that they can achieve that, and the risk is low or manageable, well, why do we want to spend the time talking to 3 or 4 other vendors when they basically going to offer us the same thing? No, that's going to take time and money I don't have. Boom, I'm done. Well, to help the customer get to that point where they're making the good enough decision, you have to be on your A game because you got to bring it. You got to help them get to that point quickly. So, yeah, there's no slacking as a salesperson. You always have to be on top of it. That's really from the buyer's perspective. Say, yeah, it's just not worth any more of our time, incremental investment of our time, to go investigate these other solutions. And that's what you want to do, because you really want to think about this as, what can I do as a seller to take this prospect off the streets? Think about that. That's a term that one client I worked with, and I really liked it, is we want to take these prospects off the street. We want to eliminate their incentive to go talk to any other vendors. Well, you can't do that if you're just saying, yeah, I'm just going to do the good enough job. No. Got to bring your A game every single time. Doesn't matter how small or how large the interaction is. It could be an email, a voicemail, in-person call, whatever. You got to be at the top of your game every time.
Love it. That is amazing. That wraps up the show. Goes back to what we touched on at the beginning, which is the only thing you can control is yourself. So I appreciate that, Andy. I've got one final question, mate. I've asked everyone that comes on the show. I think I've asked you in the past as well. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling, which has nothing to do with anything that we've just talked about? Because there's some easy cop-outs there that we could go down.
Yeah. Well, I've got a quote that I've sort of lived a good portion of my life by, my professional life by, and it's from a 19th century British writer, Thomas Huxley. And Thomas Huxley said, in life, you should try to learn something about everything and everything about something. And to me, this is what you should try to do in life, is be widely read, right? Because you never know what's going to be the point of what you know that engages the interest of your buyer. But then you also got to specialize in something, right? So in my case, I talk about people listen to my podcasts. They know I know a lot about a lot of different things. Perhaps annoyingly so, but I read widely, but I know virtually everything I could know about sales, right? And I've spent my entire life studying it, doing it, and so on. So I just think that's a watchword for anybody that's in sales. I wish I had sort of picked up on a little bit earlier in life, but it's really advice I give to somebody else is read widely, read about everything, be curious about everything that's out in the world, not just, one area. But then you do have, your professional life. What are you specializing in? It could be your product, it could be the industry you serve. Go deep on that, so that you can provide value to your prospects.
Love it. Well, with that, Andy, tell everyone who's curious after listening to the show where we can find your show, Accelerate, where we can find the Sales House, and then where we can find out more about you just in general, sir.
Sure. Well, you can find my show, Accelerate with Andy Paul, on iTunes, or come to andypaul.com, and you'll see the whole archive of shows there. If you're interested in the Sales House, I urge you to join our mailing list. You can go to thesaleshouse.com/subscribe and get on our daily email list, which is great content for you there. Or if you just want to join, come to thesaleshouse.com/join. Look forward to seeing you there. Follow me, Andy, at thesaleshouse.com if you want to drop me an email, or follow me on LinkedIn. And that is the usual stuff / the Sales House.
Amazing stuff. I'll link to all that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Andy, I appreciate this. I feel like we're on the same wavelength for a lot of things, both pre and post content, post recording. So hopefully that resonates with the audience as well. All the analytical minds that are in there. And we touched on the emotional side of it as well, which I think was useful. So with that one, thank you for joining us again on the Salesman Podcast.
Well, thank you very much.